So, how much water do you need? Let's get into that. And that is based on evapotranspiration, which basically means the evaporative demand and the transpiration demand, how hot and dry and windy it is essentially at your place. And you can measure that with this types of devices, or you can actually get a really sophisticated thing, a wash tub, put some water in there, and put something over the top of it just so dogs don't drink out of it or birds don't drink out of it. You can actually measure it, and the problem is actually how accurately to measure it. But they have things called a Class A pan where you put that on grass, and you can actually measure the amount of water use by the amount that's evaporating off of the water surface. It's actually very similar to what crops use. So you could do that if you wanted to. All right, so the other thing is, though, that we know on a historical basis what water use is in our area. And you can also go to the Press Democrat and get the evapotranspiration rates on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So boom, you got it right there. And then we come back to our climate again. Depends on where you are, of course. And then this is what we figured out in Sonoma County. So this marine climate that we have uses about 20 inches, 21 inches. This coastal climate uses about 34 inches. The coastal warm uses about 42. Now I'll tell you right now, that most crops use about, this is gross evapotranspiration rates. Most crops use about 3/4 of this amount of water. So you can multiply or divide that by 3/4, multiply by 3, divide by 4, and you would end up with the water use for those crops. So what this means is, let's just look at this coastal cool climate, 34 inches. That's almost 3 feet. Well, 3/4 of that is 2 feet, 24 inches. So that means putting on 24 inches of water, if this is my soil surface, 24 inches of water on that crop in a year during the summer to make up for. Now, if I've got a really deep soil, that's how much water does a foot of soil hold? I think I'm coming to that in a minute. Well, I'll tell you right now. In fact, I should write this down. How many? We got an inch of rain. That's just, I don't know. We got about an inch of rain the other day, right? Mm-hmm. How deep did that go in soil?
I don't know.
You guys got to know this. You're gonna farm.
Yeah. I don't know.
6 inches. 2 inches of water per foot stored in the soil, approximately. Depends on the soil. If it's clay, it'll hold more. If it's real loose sand, it'll hold less. About 2 inches of water per foot of soil. So remember I said it'd be nice to know the rooting depth. So let's say you've got 3 feet of rooting depth. How much water you got? 6 inches. Mother Nature just gave you 6 inches. What if it rains 50 inches in the wintertime? How much water you got in your soil?
100 feet.
Pardon?
100 feet?
No. If it rains 50 inches,
Yeah.
which it does in Sonoma County sometimes,
25 feet.
how much water do you have?
It's going to run off and it's going to fill up.
You only got 6 inches. I don't care if it rains 1,000 inches, you got 6 inches. I don't know, people tell me, well, it's a rainy climate. Well, I don't need to irrigate. Baloney. Your soil only stores 6 inches if you got 3 feet. Now, if you're on a hillside and you got 18 inches of soil, 1.5 feet, how much water do I have? 3 inches of water. Right? And I need 20. So I gotta have some water. So if I want to be competitive. Now, one of the things you can do is you can say, I've got a deep soil, and I'm going to go dry farm tomatoes, I'm going to go dry farm apples, and I'm going to sell them at a higher price because they taste better, and they probably do, or they do. But then how much are you losing in loss of production, et cetera, fruit size, those different kinds of things, management. So it's a game that you play essentially with water, what you can do and what you can get away with. Yeah?
Why doesn't everybody just go farming the marine if there's less water? Is there a difference in production based on soil types per coastal zone? Or?
Yes, there would be, because it's cooler, so you don't get as much sunlight. It's also tends to be a little bit wetter. There's even less water. One of the reasons you go drive around through southern Sonoma County and you see grasslands. We think it's bad in Sebastopol getting water. Drill a well out in Valley Fork, you get a half a gallon a minute or 2 gallons a minute. So there are real disadvantages in those areas. Now you go down to Salinas, you drive through the Salinas Valley, and drill a well. How much water do you get in the Salinas Valley and drill a well? 1,500 gallons a minute, 1,000 gallons a minute. You can see why they're growing vegetables and growing all the stuff that they're growing. All right, so we also have these charts. You can go online and find this on my website. And we can figure out on the basis of how hot it is. Remember that I said what the evapotranspiration rate is? You can go down to the Press Democrat and get those. 0.2 of an inch a day, 1/4 of an inch a day. So most of the time in the summer, in that medium climate, that mid climate, coastal cool climate, we're using about 1/4 of an inch of water per day. And crops are going to use about, that's evapotranspiration, crops are going to use about 3/4 of that. So if you look at that, if I'd say I got a well that produces 5 gallons a minute times 60 minutes an hour times 24 hours a day, that's 7,000 gallons. So I get lots of people telling me I got a well, I got a spring that produces 5 gallons a minute. Okay, that's 7,200 gallons, that's enough to irrigate 1 acre, 1 day, running continuously. So the bottom line is it takes a lot of water to do this. If you look at it in gallons, here's that 20 inches we're talking about in a marine climate. It's going to take about 500,000 gallons per year. It's 2 gallons a minute, 3.5 gallons a minute, 4 gallons a minute in your coastal warm climate in order to, so it's 1 million gallons a year. So a lot of times people say, well, I put in a 10,000 gallon tank. Oh, great. Okay, you got enough water for 2 days, not the whole season. And here's this formula I told you before. Loam soils hold about 1.5 to 2 inches, so clay soil is a little bit more. So just easy thing to remember is 2 inches per foot. I'll skip that. Now, one of the other things that people often don't think about is that they think that tree roots go down like 10 feet, and they don't. Well, they might if you have 10 feet of rooting depth, but we usually don't. And actually, most of the roots are in the top couple feet anyway. You're going to manage the top 2 feet. You're not going to irrigate down 10 feet. You're going to manage the top 2 feet when you irrigate with drip irrigation or sprinkler, whatever you're going to do. So most of the roots are in there anyway. So when you talk about managing irrigation on something, you're going to manage the top 2 feet. For vegetables, you're talking about the top 12 inches. So if you're going to grow lettuces and beans and tomatoes and those kinds of things, you're managing even a shallower soil profile. All right, so we're looking at irrigation water. We also want to look at the quality of that irrigation water. So we want to measure a bunch of things. You want to measure the pH of the water, electrical conductivity, which is essentially the salt content of the water, how much sodium is there, bicarbonate, and then there's a thing called the sodium absorption ratio, which looks at the amount of sodium compared to other things. So you could actually have pretty high sodium that you'd think would be a problem, but if you have really high magnesium and really high potassium and really high phosphorus, it sort of masks the sodium, even though the sodium is pretty high, and so you can get by with that. So these are some things that you want to measure. If you look at a piece of property, take a water sample, send that in, and measure. And then you want to watch out for high boron, high bicarbonates, high salts, high sodium levels, and high chlorine levels. So you don't have to write those numbers down because you'll never remember them anyway. Or you can go look them up when you need them. Okay, so how much water, how often? So it kind of depends. If you're sprinkler irrigating, you'd like to know this evapotranspiration rate, how hot is it today or this week? I want to know the application rate, how much I'm putting on. Rooting depth, because I'm going to store a bunch of water in the soil, and then the soil water holding capacity. And I can measure mathematically how much water to put on every so often. The drip irrigation, actually the soil doesn't matter, because it's really, you're just putting water on a daily basis. So you just need to know the use rate, the evapotranspiration, and the plant size. So the bigger plants can use more water. So basically with drip irrigation, you just give the plant what it needs every day. It's also another common problem. I was around when they sort of invented drip irrigation. I guess I should say I invented, like Al Gore invented the internet, didn't he? I didn't invent drip irrigation, but I remember when drip irrigation first came out, a lot of people that were selling drip irrigation systems said, oh, you're going to save 70–80% of your water use. What about your baloney? Because water use depends on how hot and dry and windy it is. The plant needs so much water every day. You're going to put it on with a sprinkler or with flood or with drip, it needs that amount of water, or it should have that amount of water. Now drip irrigation is more efficient and you'll save some water, maybe 10, 15, 20%, but you're not going to have this big, huge water savings. The plant needs a certain amount of water. Makes sense, right? And then your application rate depends on the emitter size and the spacing. So we can put it on with sprinklers, Put it on with sprinklers. Here's an example. So let's say you've got a rooting depth of 12 inches, and that's going to hold 2 inches of water. And there's another thing that you want to consider when you're irrigating is you don't want the plants to go completely dry. So 50% depletion to 75% at the most. So you're going to need to water and put on 1 inch after the plants use about 1 inch. So if the water use is about 2 inches a week and the sprinklers apply 1 inch in 4 hours, you're going to water for 4 hours twice a week. So there's a mathematical formula you can go in and you can look at what's the crop, what's my rooting depth, how much water do I need to put on, and you can mathematically figure that out. And then kind of go back and look at how are the plants doing, get a shovel out there, dig down, look and feel, and those kinds of things. For drip irrigation, the important message I want to give you is you should water the plants every day. Because you're not putting enough water on to have anything in storage. You're putting on just a little bit of water. And so you look at the soil water holding capacity is not important. I measured that already. I think I've got another thing is you don't want, because you're going to be watering every day, you don't want the emitter right here. You want the emitters out here. So if you look at typical water use pattern, inches per day, I think I went over that already. But here's a chart essentially for drip irrigation. That's what that chart was before. So if you look at, let's say, a semi-dwarf tree, 100 square feet, or if you look down at the floor here and pick out 100 of these squares, that's about the size of a tree, 10 by 10. It's one foot by 1 foot. That tree's going to use almost 16 gallons of water a day per tree. So if I use that 1/4 of an inch and 16 gallons per day, the tree occupies 100 square feet, and I got 2 1-gallon emitters per tree, I got to water for 8 hours every day. If I add 2 more emitters, I water for 4 hours every day. So you get the concept? A lot of people don't get it. They just don't put enough water. Place after place after place they go visit. They're using a drip irrigation system to put on water, thinking it's like a sprinkler irrigation system, where there's some water held in the soil for a period of time. Now, if you don't do this, and you've got a deep soil, and you control the weeds pretty well, you can kind of almost dry farm it and use drip irrigation as a supplement. And of course, it's going to help. But what you're losing when you don't irrigate like this is you're losing fruit size, in most cases, for tree crops, vegetative growth, overall production, those kinds of things. I'm trying to at least get you close to this. You may not have enough water to do this, but you want to try and get as close to it as possible. With vegetables, one of the things we want to do is try and this is a bed, or here's strawberry bed, is we like to have that whole bed wetted as much as possible. If you use the same formula for 1/4 of an inch for use in vegetables, a 3-foot wide bed, 100 feet long is 300 feet. Mathematically figured that out. That's almost 50 gallons in a bed like that, 3 feet wide, 100 feet long. And then you take your T-tape. It's got 1/2 gallon hour emitter spaced 1 foot apart, 2 lines per bed, applies 100 gallons per hour. So you water every day for 30 minutes, or every other day for an hour. So mathematically you can figure out what that. This makes a lot of sense. People do this with drip irrigation for vegetables, but for fruit trees, for some reason, people think, oh my gosh, that's too much water. Lots of different kinds of emitters. This is one of the new things for vegetable production. This is called oval tube, and you can lay that out flat, drive over the top of it with a tractor, hook your main line to that. You've got to put a pressure regulator on it, hook up your T-tape lines off of that. You can punch right into here or off of another drip line. Now, one of the other things I'll tell you is that berries do better with mini sprinklers, particularly blueberries and raspberries. Blackberries doesn't really make that as much difference, but they really like to have more of their root system wetted than just a spot here and there with a drip irrigation emitter, particularly for blueberries. It's really critical for blueberries. So this is a typical wetting pattern before I planted something in here. Mini sprinklers spaced about 8 feet apart, and each one of them shoots 8 feet, so they kind of cross over here. This one hits that one, and you got plants growing in there. They're all going to the water's going to drop right there, and you get a solid band of water. It's a lot better for the plant. You can use mini sprinklers for tree crops. We're going to see as we go out here. We'll see some of the mini sprinklers out here. This is one that I like a lot because it doesn't shoot the water very far. I don't like this one because it shoots the water out a huge distance. And you would have to let this run for 48 hours to soak down a couple of feet. And by the time you do that, now you've got root rot problems, and you've got brown rot problems, and you've got other scab problems. I'd like to have a mini sprinkler that only shoots the water in a small pattern, and that soaks the water down a couple of feet within that pattern. And then God invented the automatic valve and the automatic timer, so that you can do other things. You got time to go sit at your spreadsheet and figure out whether you're making any money or not, rather than going out turning valves off and on here and all over the place. So this is a really great tool. All right, so how many of you have been to this website? Coststudies.ucdavis.edu. And there's oodles of cost studies there on all kinds of things. You need to go to that website. So you think, I'm going to grow something, I want to take a look at that.
Also, it's Linda printed the outline for today, and as far as the online resources, it's listed there as well.
Which time do I have?
You have 15 minutes.
So you can go and see these cost studies. They're on there, and you can study them. Let's just take a few minutes, then 15 minutes, to just talk about what you can grow. You can grow lots and lots of things in Sonoma County, and I've got another 3 hours worth of presentation here talking about all the different kinds of crops you can grow. You know, there's just lots of choices. Let's look at some of the, well, the thing that makes fruit work here is that it's tree ripe. You can't compete in growing peaches with Fresno. But we can grow better tasting peaches than they can in Fresno, because we can pick them tree ripen, or we can have somebody come and pick them off the tree, et cetera, et cetera. So you think of that as the example, and the only way you can make money on peaches in Sonoma County, and I think you can make money growing peaches in Sonoma County, is to sell a tree ripened product, specialty variety. Same thing with vegetables. They have to be extremely fresh, really good looking, probably organic. We've lost a lot of crops in Sonoma County over the years. Prunes, hops, walnuts, pears, cherries, berries, apples. We used to have 13,800 acres of apples at one time. This was growing prunes. And what's special about a prune?
You try it.
The answer is nothing. That's why they're growing them over in the Central Valley. And we lost the industry here because, I mean, we don't have clubs that get together and taste prunes and go, oh my God, this Sonoma County prune's fabulous, and I'm going to give you a lot more money for it, right? Think about that when you're looking at some of these crops.
You know what I saw in the store the other day, though? A little tube, almost like a tennis can, you know, tennis balls. And it's full of little individually wrapped prunes that you open like a piece of caramel or something. No one sits and eats, hopefully, a whole bunch of prunes.
There's an exception to everything. If you can package it and make it look cool enough.
Yeah, I mean, I bought it just because it was cool.
Okay. But it's going to be harder.
Yeah.
Okay. People have been talking about hops lately. Let's grow hops in Sonoma County. This is actually a poster from the 1940s. They're looking for 1,000 hop pickers. Well, if you look at hops and growing hops, I don't know what the potential really is for hops, but there's a lot of microbreweries in Sonoma County, and people are talking about growing fresh hops and selling the fresh hop rather than the dried. Well, you're going to have fresh hops for maybe 3 weeks. What are you going to do the rest of the year? You got to dry them for the rest of the year. Now, maybe you make enough money selling them during those 3 weeks, you know, everything's wonderful. But look at what it costs to harvest hops. 4.8 man-hours for one dry pound is $96,000 an acre at $10,000. Excuse me, at $10 an hour. So I don't know, this is based on dry pound, so it's going to take a lot more for a dry pound than it is for a wet pound. So I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we have to find a way, and fortunately we do now have pickers. There are things that will take the hop berries off of the hop plant. I don't know what kind of scale you'd have to have in order to be able to do that, but you know, there are some people. I talked to somebody the other day who wants to plant 10 acres of hops, so we'll see what happens. Benzinger's tried it and had 3 acres of hops out on Highway 12, and they abandoned it after about 5 years, so I don't know what difference that makes. Walnuts is an old crop that we lost. Pears is an old crop that we lost in Sonoma County. This is still Mendocino County here. Cherries, almost all the cherries in Sonoma County were harvested for maraschino cherries. Not for fresh cherries, but for maraschino cherries. and they were salt brined and made into maraschino cherries. We took out redwood forest to plant apples a lot in Sonoma County. And like I said once before, we had 13,000 something acres. I'm not going to go into the details, but let's look at this 08-09. Look at Gravenstein apples. The yields, tons per acre, 4.46 in 2009, 2008, 9 tons. This is because you get the natural variation from one year to the next. Late apples, remember I told you it was about 12 tons to the acre, something like that, 9.7 and 12. Let's look at the processing prices, $164 a ton. That's not very much money. $2,000 an acre. You can see why the apple growers aren't making much money from the processing standpoint. Fresh fruit, though, I don't remember what my next slide is, but fresh fruit, if you're looking at a much higher price per ton, average, I think, in 2010 was 1,700. So now you're looking at something. This is where you're really getting into something that makes a lot more sense. $7,000 something an acre. But we lost the old apple industry because a lot of the dried stuff here was the processing apples, and a bunch of old crummy orchards out there right now that are just falling apart. And that's a picture I took a few years ago, just apples on the ground. And then, of course, is really what's happening is cut those down and plant them with grapes. But the fresh market, we used to have 25 packers in Sonoma County. I think there's still some potential, and I'm going to use apples as an example because I don't have a lot of time here. And I guess you can come and talk to me when we talk about some of these other crops that you might want to grow somewhere down the road. But let's talk about apples. You can grow traditional varieties, specialty varieties, antique varieties, disease-resistant varieties, early, mid-season, late varieties. Here's some of the traditional varieties. I wouldn't recommend planting very many of those. Maybe Gravenstein, just because of the name recognition of Gravenstein. But Gravenstein is a very difficult variety to grow. There's a lot of problems with it. It's got a short stem. It pushes itself off. Yields are fairly low. It's very difficult to ship. And then what do you plant? This is all Gala. If you planted that Gala thinking, boy, I'm going to make money on Royal Gala or Galaxy Gala, and then everybody else has the red one, people buy by their eyeballs, and they want the red one. So if you can switch varieties or graft over and have some of the best strains, you're in a better position. Here's some of the old ones. If you are going to grow Gravenstein, I would recommend you grow Rosebrook Grab. It's a real nice looking fruit. Got that kind of pretty red stripe. Lots of different, here's some new specialty varieties which I think are interesting. Honeycrisp is kind of the new one out there. Pink Pearl is interesting, kind of a new specialty variety. There's a bunch of them. Here's the difference between a regular Golden Delicious, which you might harvest, it's still kind of green, and here's the Golden Supreme, more golden color. There's Honeycrisp, Pink Ladies, brand new out there. Here's some antique varieties that I think actually have some potential because of the name recognition. Jonathan, Sierra Beauty, Arkansas Black, Northern Spice, Spitzenberg, Macintosh. And here's what some of those look like. And people get excited about this, and I think this is where a lot of the potential is, and the people in the Bay Area going, oh my God, I love these apples, I can't get them anywhere. I'm going to come to Sonoma County and get them, or I'm going to go to the store somewhere in the Bay Area that's Sonoma County supplying them. Yeah.
See, the average shopper, I can't tell much of a difference between some of those. I wouldn't know. So is it the name?
You wouldn't, but there, and it actually is the reason why this is not just absolute slam dunk, but there are specialty stores that have these different varieties, and people who love apples taste these different apples, and they fall in love with certain varieties, and they pay more for them. But yeah, one of the things that's happened is that we've sort of lost a lot of that charm of interesting different apple varieties because we've got a red one and a yellow one and a green one in the supermarket. And I know, not necessarily my kids because they grew up tasting a lot of different apples, but other kids, my kids' age, you know, an apple, and I don't even really like apples. And then when they do get an apple, they don't really care which one it is because they don't know them, and then, you know, it's just sort of, we've lost a bit of that. But suffice it to say, with 8 million people in the Bay Area, that there's enough people out there that know good apples and would buy and spend more money for some good apple, different apple varieties. And then here's, I think, is an interesting group of apples that have some potential, particularly because we have a lot of apple scab disease in Sonoma County and some fire blight. You can grow these and not have to spray them for that because they're disease resistant. A couple of my favorites here are Gold Rush and Williams Pride. There's Gold Rush right there, here's Williams Pride. And we have both those apples growing out here. I don't know if there's still any fruit out there or not, but if there is, we can look at them and taste them. It'd be nice to do that. But look at all the different apple varieties. Here's one called Summer Free. And I'll tell you right now, apples, almost any apple harvested right off the tree is good. How many of you like Rome Beauty apples? Because you harvested, you got it right off the tree. When you go to buy Rome in the grocery store, they're mushy and they don't, they're just not very good. But if you pick them right off the tree and eat them within just a few days, they're fabulous. Early varieties and late varieties, and well, here's modern apple culture. Nice big fruit on a dwarf rootstock. Anybody know Sally and Mike Gale in Marin County? Planted 2 acres of apples. They had a bed and breakfast there for a number of years. Individual trees with a wood chip mound around each one. They just have barely enough water to irrigate these because they're in a real water scarce area. They're actually doing very well with just a couple of acres of apples. All specialty varieties. Most of the people come out and buy them right there from them.
How many varieties would they do in a place like that?
I think they have about 20 varieties. Here's what a modern apple orchard could look like. Nice big, these are galas here, nice big fruit on young small trees, easy to thin, easy to harvest, easy to pick. Here's another one. This is actually in Italy, photograph that I took in Italy. I was there a couple of years ago. And then I think one of the things that is helpful is to grow them organically. We can grow apples organically now. It's not as difficult as it used to be. We have some good pest control measures for, particularly if you've got a big enough block for codling moth. We have a number of materials that you can use, mineral materials for scab, et cetera, some disease-resistant varieties. So growing them organically can get you at least a bit of a premium. Okay, I think with that maybe.
Well, let's see if there's any questions on any of this material, or and then we'll head out to the orchard. Anybody?